An alien empire mocked his ship, so he rewrote physics and fed them to a black hole. The end of the world, or at least this small, metallic corner of it, began not with a bang, but with a sickening lurch. It was a motion that didn't belong in a universe governed by inertia, a feeling like your stomach had been teleported 3 feet to the left of the rest of your body. One moment, the bridge of the Terran Confederation Ship Indomitable was a model of quiet, professional tension, bathed in the cool blue-white of standard operational lighting. The next, gravity failed, then reversed, then slammed back into place with the force of a giant's boot heel. The main lights didn't just go out, they shattered, a cascade of popping sounds lost in the rising shriek of alarms. The bridge plunged into a primal darkness, instantly replaced by the hellish, blood-red glow of combat emergency floods. The alarms weren't the clean, sterile chimes of a training simulation. They were a dissonant chorus of tormented souls, screaming from every console and bulkhead, a sound designed by some long-dead, deeply sadistic engineer to bypass the conscious mind and claw directly at the lizard brain. Strapped into the worn leather of his command chair, Captain Silas Crowe didn't flinch. He remained an island of defiant stillness in a sea of controlled chaos. In his right hand, held with preternatural steadiness, was a chipped ceramic mug that had seen more battles than half the crew. The black liquid within, a concoction affectionately known on board as recycled coffee, barely sloshed. His gaze was fixed on the main view screen, a vast, armored panel that now showed a scene of impossible, silent violence. Outside, the Dravari Hegemony's fleet danced. Their ships weren't the hard-angled, utilitarian boxes of human design. They were things of sleek, biomechanical beauty, all flowing curves and nacreous hulls that shimmered like oil on water. They moved with the fluid, arrogant grace of a pack of great white sharks circling a bleeding seal, and they were bleeding the Indomitable dry without firing a single shot. There were no lances of plasma, no kinetic slugs impacting the hull. The attacks were invisible, ripples in the fabric of spacetime itself. The Dravari were masters of gravity, projecting localized, high-density wells, crush fields, the tactical analysts called them, that pummeled the Indomitable's shields. Each impact was silent, yet the ship screamed under the strain. The view on the screen warped and distorted with every hit, the distant stars smearing like wet paint as space itself was twisted and compressed. On the bridge, the crew fought the battle on 2 fronts, against the enemy outside and the physics inside. Bodies strained against high-G restraints. A young ensign, his face a waxy, pale mask in the red gloom, frantically tried to keep his console from overloading. His voice, when he called out the damage reports, was a high, thin thing, threatening to snap. Shields at 41% and failing. Emitter 4 is offline. Emitter 6 is gone, he stammered. A heavier, silent blow struck the port side. The entire ship groaned, a deep, resonant sound of tortured metal that vibrated through the deck plates and up through the soles of Crowe's boots. The ensign Thorn let out a small, involuntary gasp. "Sir, portside armor buckling. Inertial compensators are redlining at 800%. They can't take much more of this." Crowe took a slow, deliberate sip from his mug. The coffee tasted like dirt, desperation, and the faint, chemical tang of the water reclamation system working overtime. It was perfect. A taste for a perfect day. "Steady, Ensign Thorn," Crowe grunted, his voice a low gravel that seemed to absorb the surrounding panic. He didn't take his eyes off the deadly ballet on the view screen. "Let them get cocky. Let them think they're landing killing blows." He gestured vaguely toward the tactical station, manned by a grim-faced woman with a shaved head and a network of data jacks gleaming on her temple. "Tactical, keep our primitive kinetic batteries firing. A nice, predictable spread. Give them something shiny to shoot at." The tactical officer, Lieutenant Jacks, nodded without turning. "Aye, Captain. Firing slugs. They're swatting them out of the sky like flies, sir. Not a single round has gotten within 10,000 clicks of their hulls." "That's not the point, Jacks," Crowe murmured, more to himself than to her. "The point is that we're trying. The Dravari believed in elegance. They believed in the supremacy of their technology, a weapon that was both sword and shield, undetectable and indefensible. They saw humanity's reliance on chemical propellants and solid projectiles as the thrashing of a lesser species, clinging to the first rungs of the evolutionary ladder. It was a fatal strain of arrogance, and Crowe was counting on it. He'd bet the lives of his 300 crew members on it. A shimmering distortion appeared in the middle of the bridge, coalescing into a life-sized holographic image. The Dravari commander. It was a courtesy they always extended to their victims just before the end, a final chance to broadcast their superiority. The creature was tall and slender, its 4 arms crossed over a chest encased in shimmering, silver armor that seemed to flow like mercury. Its head was elongated, and 4 black, multifaceted eyes regarded Crowe with an expression of utter, undisguised contempt. "Captain Silas Crowe," the Dravari's voice echoed through the bridge speakers, a smooth baritone sound layered with a faint, condescending hiss. "Your resistance is illogical. Your vessel is a relic, a monument to a failed design philosophy. You cannot harm us. You cannot escape us. Surrender now, and the hegemony will grant your crew a swift and efficient processing." Processing, Crowe savored the word. The Dravari were meticulous. They didn't believe in waste. Processing meant every crew member would be cataloged, dissected, and rendered down into their base components. Their technology would be studied and dismissed, their history archived as a footnote. It was the sterile, bureaucratic evil of the truly self-assured. Some species glassed your planets. The Dravari filed you away. Crowe found he hated them for it more than any world burner. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, making sure the hollow pickup was focused on him. He raised his left hand and offered the shimmering alien a lazy, deliberate, single-fingered salute. "We're still debating the terms of your surrender," Crowe said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "There's a bit of a disagreement on the bridge. I'm for letting you lot suffocate in the void, but my XO thinks that's too kind. We'll get back to you." The Dravari commander's 4 eyes narrowed. The projection flickered, the air crackling with its indignation. Before it could respond, Crowe stabbed a control on his armrest. The hologram vanished with a squelch of static. Silence reigned for a full 3 seconds, broken only by the whimpering of stressed machinery. Commander Eva Ristova, Crowe's executive officer, unstrapped herself from the co-pilot's chair and moved to his side. She was a tall, severe woman, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that brooked no nonsense. She was the steel to his rust, the pragmatist to his mad gambler. She planted her hands on her hips, a gesture that managed to convey both profound exasperation and unwavering trust. "Are you quite finished antagonizing the unstoppable alien armada, sir?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "Almost," Crowe said, taking another sip of coffee. I think he was about to make a counteroffer, probably something involving a slightly less efficient processing. "The outer hull on decks 4 through 7 is beginning to shear," she reported, ignoring his gallows humor. Her eyes were fixed on a secondary monitor displaying a wireframe of the Indomitable. Angry red lines pulsed along the port side like a festering wound. "They aren't just trying to crack us open anymore, Silas. They're moving in. Tactical shows their gravity tethers are tightening, preparing for a focused pull. They're going to pin us and board." Crowe's eyes finally left the main view screen. He looked at the tactical display, a 3-dimensional map of their predicament. The Indomitable was a lone blue icon at the center. Surrounding it, a constellation of red icons, the Dravari fleet was drawing closer, their projected fields overlapping to form a perfect, inescapable cage of warped spacetime. It was a spiderweb, and they were the fly, hopelessly tangled. A slow, predatory grin spread across Crowe's face, a chilling sight in the crimson light. It was the expression of a man who had just seen a royal flush fall into his hand. "Excellent," he breathed. He placed his coffee mug down on its magnetic coaster with a decisive, final click. The sound cut through the noise of the bridge, drawing the attention of every crew member. The battle was over. The execution was about to begin. "They're bringing all their pretty ships in close for the party," Crowe announced, his voice now resonating with a cold, hard authority that banished all traces of his earlier cynicism. "They wouldn't want anyone to miss the fireworks." He swiveled his chair to face Rostova, his eyes burning with a light she recognized all too well. It was the look he got just before he tore up the rulebook and set it on fire. "Eva," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, an order that was also a prayer. "Go to engineering, supervise the final sequence yourself. No mistakes." She nodded once, her expression hardening into one of absolute resolve. "Understood, Captain." She turned and strode toward the bridge elevator, her movements economical and swift. Crowe keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is the captain." His voice boomed through the wounded vessel, through every corridor and compartment. "Secure for sea. Double-check your restraints. We're about to hit some turbulence." He paused, letting the understatement hang in the air. "Brace for gravitational inversion." He cut the comm and turned his attention back to his command console. His fingers, steady as a surgeon's, danced across a security lock panel. He entered a long string of alphanumeric codes, a password known only to him and 2 other people in the entire Terran Confederation, both of whom were currently safe and sound 1,000 light-years away. A new set of controls lit up on his screen, their labels written not in standard fleet terminology, but in a strange, archaic script. It was a system that, officially, did not exist, a weapon that was considered a technological and ethical impossibility. His XO's voice came over his private channel, crisp and clear from the heart of the engine room. "Engineering is ready, Captain. The conduits are stable. We are standing by on your mark." Crowe looked at the tactical display one last time. The Dravari ships were now in their final positions, a perfect sphere of predators surrounding their trapped prey. They were so close he could see the intricate patterns on their hulls through the magnified viewscreen. They were confident. They were arrogant. They were right where he wanted them. He opened a channel to his tactical officer. "Jax, target the 4 largest hostiles, 1 for each primary emitter." "Sir," Jax replied, her voice strained with confusion. "Target them with what? The kinetic cannons are." "Not the cannons, Lieutenant," Crowe interrupted, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Something new." He looked toward the empty co-pilot's chair where Rostova had been sitting. He gave a slight nod, as if she were still there. Then he leaned into his private comm, his voice calm and final, delivering the order that would either save them or erase them from existence. "Eva, unleash the heresy." For a single, drawn-out second, nothing happened. The alarms continued to scream. The ship continued to shudder under the relentless, invisible assault of the Dravari crush fields. The red lights pulsed, painting the faces of the bridge crew in shades of blood and fear. Ensign Thorne was gripping his console so hard his knuckles were white, his eyes squeezed shut as if anticipating the final, catastrophic hull breach. Then came the hum. It wasn't a sound, not in the traditional sense of vibrations traveling through the air. It was a feeling that started deep in the bones, in the fillings of your teeth. It was a low, resonant thrum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a vibration that resonated on a quantum level. The screaming alarms faltered, then died, plunging the bridge into an eerie, profound silence. The violent shaking of the ship ceased. The crushing, intermittent pressure of the Dravari fields vanished, replaced by a sensation of absolute, perfect stillness. It was as if the Indomitable had been plucked from the battlefield and placed inside a pocket of null space. Thorne opened his eyes, his expression one of bewildered disbelief. "Sir, what was that? All external gravitational sources just zeroed out." "That ensign," Crowe said, his knuckles white on the arms of his chair, "is the sound of the rules changing." The heresy humanity had nurtured in secret for 50 years wasn't a bigger gun or a stronger shield. It was a fundamental reimagining of physics. The Dravari had mastered gravity, learning to project it, to shape it into a weapon. They could create immense gravitational forces, but they were still subject to the consequences. Their ships, for all their elegance, still had to obey the laws of inertia. Firing their weapons created recoil on a cosmic scale, which their drives had to constantly fight to compensate for. Humanity, after a century of being battered by gravity-wielding races, had taken a different, more insane path. They hadn't learned to control gravity. They had learned to ignore inertia. The massive, power-hungry experimental generators deep in the Indomitable's core weren't creating a field to push back. They were creating a bubble of spacetime where the law of F equals ma simply ceased to apply. Inside this bubble, the ship was, for all intents and purposes, a phantom, an object with mass but no inertia. It could accelerate and decelerate at impossible rates without turning the crew into a thin protein paste. It was a technology so far beyond the Dravari's understanding that they didn't even have a theory for it. It was, to their ordered, logical minds, pure heresy. And it was only the first part of the trap. Crowe watched the main view screen. He could see the confusion on the bridges of the Dravari ships. Their quarry had suddenly gone silent and inert. Their crush fields were dissipating against nothing. He could almost taste their frustration, their wounded pride. On the shimmering hollow display of the Dravari flagship, the Hegemon's fist, Grav Primarch Kalen, stared at his tactical readouts, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. The human ship was still there, a clear and solid reading on every sensor, yet it registered no energy output, no shield harmonics, no gravitational footprint. It was a ghost. "Report," Kalen hissed at his bridge commander. "All systems appear to have failed, Grav Primarch," the subordinate officer reported. "Their power core must have imploded. The vessel is dead in space. A derelict." Kalen's thin lips peeled back in a sneer of triumph. The primitives had simply broken under the strain. How predictable. Their arrogance has undone them. Signal the fleet. Prepare boarding parties. I want their captain brought to me. I will have him witness the processing of his crew personally before I peel the secrets from his dying mind. Rip them open. Crowe saw the subtle shift in the Dravari fleet's posture. Small ports opened on their sleek hulls, preparing to launch boarding craft. Tractor beams, a cruder but more direct form of gravity manipulation, began to lock on. They were clustered close, vultures moving in for the kill. "They're taking the bait," Jax whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Of course they are," Crowe said grimly. "Pride is a more powerful force than gravity." He nodded to himself. It was time. "Eva," he said into the private comm. "Phase 2, fire on my mark." He watched the lead Dravari cruiser, a vessel twice the size of the Indomitable, drift closer, its belly opening to disgorge its troops. It was a magnificent ship, a testament to an empire's power. It was also about to become a lesson in humility. "Mark." The captain's command, "Mark," was not a shout. It was a quiet, final word spoken into the abyss, a single syllable that sealed the fate of a fleet. Deep within the engineered labyrinth of the Indomitable's core, Commander Eva Rostova heard it in her headset and didn't hesitate. Her fingers, a blur of practiced motion across a console that glowed with alien equations, completed the final circuit. "Heresy engaged, Captain," she confirmed, her voice impossibly calm. "Spooling the singularity chargers." The bone-deep hum that had silenced the alarms intensified, modulating into a sound that felt ancient and wrong. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that was never meant to be opened, the vibration of fundamental constants being forcibly rewritten. The emergency lights on the bridge flickered, not with power failure, but as if the photons themselves were struggling to decide which laws of physics to obey. The violent shaking was gone, the crushing pressure had vanished. An unnatural, dead calm descended, a pocket of absolute tranquility in the heart of a maelstrom. This was the first secret, the inertial dampener field, a bubble of spacetime where cause and effect had been temporarily suspended. This was the anvil, now came the hammer. Aboard the Dravari flagship, the Hegemon's Fist, Grav Primarch Kalen watched the human vessel go inert on his tactical display. The chaotic energy readings, the pathetic shield fluctuations, the clumsy kinetic projectiles, all of it ceased. The ship was now just a silent, drifting piece of metal. A corpse. "Their systems have failed," his tactical officer announced, a triumphant hiss in his voice. "Power core failure cascade, Primarch. The strain was too much for their primitive technology. The vessel is dead in space." A wave of smug satisfaction washed over the Fist's bridge. The primitives had been arrogant, defiant, and ultimately fragile. Kalen's 4 black eyes gazed upon the dead human ship with the detached satisfaction of a biologist observing a lesser organism expire. The captain's insolent gesture replayed in his mind. He would enjoy making the human pay for that. "Their hubris is their tomb," Kalen declared, his voice resonating with the authority of a god pronouncing judgment. He turned to his subcommander. "Signal the fleet. They are to be boarded and taken. I want their technology dissected, their data logs seized, and their captain brought to me, alive. He will have the honor of watching his crew's processing before I personally flay the defiance from his mind." He made a dismissive gesture with one of his 4 slender hands. "Rip them open." Across the Dravari fleet, the sleek, nacreous hulls responded. Tractor beams, crude but effective tools for their current purpose, began to energize. Boarding craft hatches slid open, ready to disgorge warriors. The predators closed in on the carcass, their guard down, their focus shifting from destruction to acquisition. They saw a prize, not a threat. It was the last mistake any of them would ever make. "They're taking the bait," Jax, the tactical officer, breathed from her station. "All ships converging, tractor beams locking on." "A captive audience," Crowe murmured. His hands were gripping the arms of his command chair, the only outward sign of the immense tension coiled within him. He watched the lead Dravari cruiser, the Will of Kalos, loom large on the viewscreen, its ventral boarding bay a gaping maw. His private comm chimed. It was Rostova. "Chargers at 100%, Captain. The containment fields are stable, but they won't hold for long. We are on a razor's edge." "Then let's give them a push," Crowe said. He opened the firing channel. His voice was a blade of ice. "Fire." There was no thunderous roar, no brilliant flash of light. The Indomitable did not shudder. From 4 hidden emitters along the ship's battered and scarred hull ports that looked like mundane maintenance access points, something emerged. It wasn't a projectile. It wasn't a beam. It was a quartet of perfect, silent pinpricks of absolute nothingness. They were not weapons that traveled through space. They were weapons that were space, folded in on itself with impossible density. 4 micro-singularities, stable for a mere 3 seconds. An eternity. The effect was not an explosion but an inversion, a surgical removal of reality. The 2 closest singularities bloomed into existence on either side of the Will of Kalos. For a microsecond, the Dravari cruiser, a warship weighing millions of tons, hung suspended between them. Then physics, rewritten and weaponized, rendered its judgment. The ship was not ripped apart, it was unmade. The forward third of the cruiser, the section housing its primary weapon arrays and command decks, elongated with impossible speed, its elegant lines stretching into a grotesque, shimmering filament of matter drawn inexorably toward the first singularity. Simultaneously, the aft section, containing the main drive and engineering, was sucked backward into the second point of nothingness. The ship screamed. It was not a sound that could travel through the vacuum of space, but a shriek of tortured metal, collapsing energy fields, and the unified psychic death agony of its 1,000-strong crew, a wave of pure horror that rippled through the warped space-time medium. The bridge crew of the Indomitable felt it as a sudden, nauseating wave of vertigo and dread. In the center of the ship, where the 2 forces met, matter and energy ceased to have meaning. The cruiser's core, its mighty gravity projectors, detonated in a silent, blossoming flower of incandescent plasma that was instantly devoured by the twin abysses that had created it. 3 seconds after they were born, the singularities evaporated, their task complete. Where a proud Dravari warship had been, there was now only a rapidly dissipating cloud of superheated gas and the lingering, ghostly echo of a scream. It was gone, unmade. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Ensign Thorne stared, his mouth agape, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. "Gods," he whispered. But this was only the opening salvo. The real horror was just beginning. The Dravari fleet's greatest weapon had just become their executioner. The singularities in their brief, violent existence had acted like gravitational depth charges. Their immense, localized gravity had not just destroyed one ship. It had violently hijacked the intricate web of crush fields the Dravari had so carefully constructed. The delicate, overlapping projections that had formed their cage were now a chaotic, uncontrollable maelstrom. Their own power, amplified and reflected back upon them, turned their fleet into a blender of cosmic proportions. A sleek frigate, the graceful Blade, was caught in a tidal shear between the collapsing field of the destroyed Will of Kalos and its own unstable gravity drive. The ship was twisted like a piece of clay, its spine snapping with a silent flash of internal explosions before it was violently flung into the side of a much larger battlecruiser, the Hegemon's Shadow. The kinetic impact, at a velocity no ship was designed to withstand, was apocalyptic. The Hegemon's Shadow, its shields already flickering from the gravitational chaos, shattered like porcelain, its fragments becoming a new wave of deadly shrapnel in the churning chaos. Another Dravari destroyer, its gravity projectors now pulling uncontrollably inward, imploded. Its hull, designed to withstand immense external pressure, folded in on itself as if squeezed by an invisible giant. Lights blinked out along its length as it collapsed into a dense, misshapen ball of metal before erupting in a final, silent flash of escaping atmosphere and dying energy. The Dravari fleet descended into a symphony of self-destruction, a ballet of horrific, silent death choreographed by a human captain 1,000 light-years from home. They tried to fight it. Drives flared as captains attempted to pull away, to escape the gravitational fratricide. But it was like trying to outrun an earthquake. Their ships were being battered by their sister ships' death throes. Their own weapons were killing them. The very force they had mastered had turned on them with rabid, insane fury. Aboard the Hegemon's Fist, pandemonium reigned. Grav Primarch Kalen stood frozen, his 4 eyes wide with a dawning, soul-shattering comprehension. His bridge was a cacophony of alarms, the real kind, the ones that signaled imminent, inescapable doom. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as hijacked gravitational waves tore through his ship systems. "Report," he shrieked, his regal composure utterly shattered. "We've lost the graceful Blade, the Shadow is gone, the unwavering gaze has imploded." His tactical officer screamed back, his voice thin with terror. "Their weapon, it turned our fields against us. It's a cascading resonance failure. We can't disengage." Kalen stared at the viewscreen. He saw the Indomitable floating serene and untouched in the center of the carnage he had orchestrated. It hadn't moved. It had simply watched. It was a spider that had convinced the flies to build their own web and then set it on fire. The arrogance, the sheer, terrifying arrogance of the primitives. It wasn't that their technology was crude. It was that their philosophy of warfare was alien, devious, and utterly, horrifyingly effective. A third singularity bloomed into existence, this one directly in the path of the Hegemon's Fist. Kalen didn't have time to scream. A tidal force of unimaginable power seized his flagship. The front of the vessel was pulled toward the event horizon while the rear, still possessing inertia, fought to remain. The ship, a kilometer-long masterpiece of Dravari engineering, began to corkscrew. Bulkheads shrieked and tore apart. The bridge tilted at a sickening angle, throwing crew members from their stations. Kalen felt his own body being stretched, his bones groaning in protest. His last fleeting thought was of the human captain's insolent salute. It wasn't an insult, it was a promise. The singularity did not just swallow the Hegemon's Fist. It devoured it, pulling the magnificent ship into its infinitesimal point of forever, stripping it down to its constituent atoms and snuffing its light from the universe. The fourth and final singularity blossomed near the rear of the collapsing fleet, catching a cluster of escaping frigates and pulling them back into the grinder, ensuring there would be no survivors, no witnesses. And then it was over. The 3-second reign of terror was complete. On the bridge of the Indomitable there had been no jarring recoil, no violent shudder. The inertial dampeners had absorbed the feedback from the singularity launchers completely. To the crew, it was as if they had been passengers in a simulator, watching a particularly gruesome holovid. The ship remained perfectly still, a silent observer to the apocalypse it had wrought. The red emergency light still painted everything in blood. The tactical display was a nightmare of wreckage, of distorted sensor ghosts, and dissipating energy signatures. Where a proud and powerful fleet had been just moments before, there was now only a vast, silent graveyard of twisted metal and frozen, vaporized corpses. The space between the stars was littered with the ruins of an empire's arrogance. Ensign Thorne was on his hands and knees, vomiting quietly into a waste receptacle. Jax, the tactical officer, stood frozen at her post, her hands hovering over her console, her face a pale mask of awe and terror. Other crew members were simply staring, their expressions blank with shock, their minds struggling to bridge the gap between the calm inside the ship and the utter desolation outside. There were no cheers. There was no celebration. The silence on the bridge was heavier and more profound than any gravity weapon. It was the silence of men and women who had just stared into the abyss and realized they were the monster looking back. Crowe's hands slowly relaxed their grip on his chair. He took a deep, steadying breath, the recycled air tasting stale and thin. He had seen battle, death, and destruction his entire career. But this was different. This wasn't war. It was extermination carried out with the cold, passionless efficiency of a mathematical equation. He had known the weapon was powerful. He hadn't truly understood, not until this moment, that it was a weapon that didn't just win battles. It ended arguments. Permanently. He swiveled his chair, the slight creak of the leather loud in the crushing silence. He leaned forward and keyed the broad-spectrum comms, setting the transmission to maximum power, a single voice broadcasting into the newly created void. "This is Captain Silas Crowe of the Terran Confederation Ship Indomitable," he said, his voice a low, cynical drawl that carried across the vacuum, a message for any listening posts, for any gods or demons that might be paying attention. Any other devotees of gravity want to come pray at our altar? The only reply was the faint, indifferent crackle of cosmic background radiation, the hiss of an empty, listening universe. The silence that followed the slaughter was a physical presence on the bridge of the Indomitable. It was heavier than any gravity weapon, more suffocating than the vacuum of space. The crimson combat lights, which moments before had pulsed with the rhythm of impending doom, now seemed to be painting the scene in the color of guilt. They bathed the bridge crew in the hue of the blood they had just spilled from 1,000 light-years away, a vicarious stain on their souls. Outside on the main view screen was a vision of hell rendered in cold, silent metal. The Dravari fleet was gone. In its place hung a vast, three-dimensional junkyard of impossible shapes. Hulls were twisted into grotesque spirals. Shimmering bioarmor was peeled back to reveal the blackened viscera of command decks, and everywhere, a fine dust of vaporized metal and frozen atmosphere caught the light of a distant, indifferent star, creating a ghastly, glittering shroud. The tactical display was a graveyard of sensor ghosts and fading energy signatures. Red icons that had represented vessels crewed by thousands of living beings were now just blinking error messages and wreckage tags. Ensign Thorne, the young officer who had been on the verge of panic minutes before, was now staring at his console, his face utterly slack with shock. He wasn't looking at the readings anymore. He was just looking through them. He whispered the epitaph for an entire fleet into the oppressive quiet. "They're just gone." The words, barely audible, shattered the spell. Crew members stirred, shaking their heads as if waking from a nightmare, only to find it was real. Someone coughed, a dry, racking sound. Another cursed, a low, bitter prayer to a god who had clearly left the building. The adrenaline of the fight, the terror of imminent destruction, had vanished. In its place was a cold, hollow dread, the kind that comes after the fever breaks and you're left with the bill for the damages. Captain Silas Crowe felt it more than anyone. The fire in his veins had turned to ice. There was no triumph, no surge of victory, only the bitter, metallic aftertaste of necessity. This wasn't a battle he had won. It was a line he had crossed. He unstrapped himself from his command chair, the motion stiff, his bones aching with a weariness that went far beyond the physical. He strode to the tactical station, placing a hand on the shoulder of Lieutenant Jax. She flinched, then looked up at him, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of awe and horror. She had executed the commands that had unmade a fleet, and the knowledge was a visible weight upon her. "Clean up the mess, Lieutenant," Crowe ordered, his voice devoid of emotion, a flat, professional tone that felt like a betrayal of the carnage on the screen. "Run full-spectrum scans. I want a complete casualty assessment and wreckage analysis. Log every scrap, every energy flare. We need to know exactly what this thing does." He turned, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. "Helm, maintain position. Comms, I want total signal silence until further notice. No victory laps." His eyes found Commander Eva Rostova stepping out of the bridge elevator. She had returned from the heart of the engine room, from the altar of their heresy. Her face was a mask of iron professionalism, but her dark eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were wide and haunted. She had felt the weapon's power spooling up through the deck plates. She had held the leash of their monster. Crowe met her gaze. "Commander," he said, his voice dropping slightly, meant for her and the few others nearby, "log the engagement and classify the weapon deployment. Use the designation we discussed." Rostova nodded, her throat working. "Classification." "Code name, Newton's Nightmare," Crowe said grimly. "Because we just took his apple and turned it into a damn black hole." He turned away from her, moving to his command console. He knew what came next, the part he dreaded almost as much as the fighting itself, the paperwork, the politics, the phone call home. "And Eva," he added, his back to her, "get me high command. Scramble it on a tight beam laser, highest priority. They're going to have a galactic-sized aneurysm when they see these sensor logs." The victory was absolute, but the implications were terrifying. Humanity had been the underdog for a century, fighting tooth and nail against technologically superior races, winning battles through grit, cunning, and a willingness to bleed more than the other guy. They were the masters of asymmetric warfare, the scrappy brawlers of the galaxy. But with the firing of the singularity cannons, that narrative had just been ripped up and incinerated. Humanity had just revealed its ace, and it wasn't just another card. It was a weapon that changed the entire game. A weapon that didn't just win battles but broke them. A weapon that made war with a species like the Dravari not a matter of attrition, but of simple, brutal annihilation. Rostova approached his chair as he began routing the call through layers of quantum encryption. She stood beside him, her arms crossed, a fortress of composure that was beginning to crack at the foundations. "Sir," she began, her voice low and tight, stripped of its usual certainty, "Silas, what have we done?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp as a shard of broken glass. It was the question every person on that bridge was asking themselves, the question that would echo through the halls of Terran High Command, the question that would reshape the future of the entire species. Crowe didn't answer immediately. He swiveled his chair to face the main view screen, to face the tomb he had created. The twisted, silent shapes of the Dravari ships drifted in the starlight, a testament to a power humanity was never supposed to have. "We did what we always do, Eva," he said finally, his voice a low, cynical rasp. "We found a bigger rock to throw." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. They came at us with spears, so we invented the bow. They came at us with gunpowder, so we invented the nuke. And when they came at us with gravity, we just took the next logical, insane step. He gestured at the wreckage. They thought they were the masters of gravity. We just reminded them that the universe always has a bigger monster, and today it was us. This isn't a bigger rock, Silas, she countered, her voice trembling with a fury he rarely saw. This is a planet killer disguised as a cannon. This is a weapon that doesn't defeat an enemy, it erases them from the equation. We didn't just win a battle, we committed mass murder with physics. It was them or us, Crowe shot back, his own voice hardening. You saw their commander, you heard him, swift and efficient processing. They weren't going to take prisoners, Eva. They were going to file us away in a goddamn specimen jar. I chose us. And what happens next time? She demanded. What happens when the Cathar or the Signian Confederacy decides we're too dangerous to exist? Do we unmake them too? Where does it stop? We were supposed to be the defenders, the ones holding the line. When did we become the executioners? Before Crowe could answer, a chime from his console indicated that the encrypted channel was open. A face appeared on his private hollow emitter. Not a smiling politician or a proud admiral. It was Fleet Admiral Jericho Vance, the head of Special Weapons Development, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain for a century. His expression was grim, his eyes holding the cold, hard light of a man who dealt exclusively in unthinkable possibilities. Crowe, Vance's voice crackled, all business. The data burst just finished uploading. My analysts are looking at it now. They seem to be having trouble believing it. The data is accurate, Admiral, Crowe said flatly. Hostile fleet engaged and neutralized. The Indomitable has sustained moderate but repairable structural damage. No casualties on our side. Vance was silent for a long moment. Crowe could hear frantic, muffled voices in the background of the transmission. The aneurysm was beginning. Neutralized, Captain. The logs show you engaged a fleet of 27 Dravari capital ships, including the flagship of Grav Primarch Kaelin. Your report says there are no survivors. No wreckage larger than a few hundred meters. Neutralized doesn't seem to be the correct term. What term would you prefer, Admiral? Crowe asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. Disassembled, deconstructed, expunged. The project's code name was Checkmate, Captain, Vance said, his voice a low growl. It was meant to be a deterrent, a weapon of last resort to force a stalemate. It was never meant to be used not like this. You weren't authorized to deploy it. My authorization, Crowe said, leaning forward, was the Dravari fleet preparing to board my ship and process my crew. My authorization was their commander promising to flay me alive. My orders were to protect this vessel and its technology at all costs. I did that. The Checkmate project is secure. You've painted a target on the back of every man, woman, and child in the Terran Confederation. Another voice suddenly shouted in the background, a voice Crowe recognized as belonging to a high-ranking politician on the Defense Council. The Dravari will retaliate with everything they have. You've started a war of annihilation. The Dravari started this war 100 years ago, Crowe shot back, his voice rising. They've been processing our colonies on the outer rim for decades. The only thing that's changed is that, for the first time, we punched back hard enough to break their jaw. Maybe now they'll think twice. Think twice? Vance cut back in, his voice cold as the void. Or maybe they'll see us as an existential threat that must be wiped out, a species that wields the power of creation as a weapon of destruction. You didn't just show them a new gun, Captain. You showed them a new god, and it's a vengeful one. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? I know exactly what I've unleashed, Admiral, Crowe said, his voice dropping again, full of a terrible weariness. I unleashed a chance to survive. You wanted a deterrent, congratulations. I have a feeling every race in this quadrant is going to be deterred as hell. The rest is your problem. I'm just the guy who pulls the trigger. He looked at the wreckage on the view screen. "What are my orders, Admiral?" There was a long, heavy silence from the other end of the line. Crowe could picture the scene. A darkened room 1,000 light-years away, filled with powerful people who had just been handed a weapon they were too scared to hold, but now too powerful to let go of. They had wanted a monster on a leash. Crowe had just let it off the chain to savage their enemies, and now they didn't know how to call it back. Finally, Vance's voice returned, strained and resigned. "Maintain your position, Captain. Conserve power. Do not engage any other vessel, hostile or otherwise. Await further instructions. Vance out." The hollow emitter went dark. Crowe leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. He felt drained, hollowed out. He had won the argument, but it felt like another loss. He had spoken with the confidence of a man who was right, but he felt the doubt of a man who was damned. He looked over at Rostova. She was still standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression unreadable. The fire was gone, replaced by a deep, sorrowful understanding. They were in this together, and the abyss they had stared into was now their home. He ran a hand over his face. The recycled coffee he'd left on his console was long cold. He picked it up anyway, swirling the dregs. The taste of dirt and desperation. A taste for the end of an era. He had been a soldier in a war of survival. Now, what was he? The vanguard of a genocide. The high priest of a new, terrible religion built on weaponized black holes. A single, insistent light began to blink on his command console. A Priority 1 message, encrypted with the highest-level fleet command ciphers. It wasn't from Vance. It was from the operational command of the entire Terran Navy. His heart sank. This was it, the recall order, the court-martial. The political fallout was coming for him. He'd be the scapegoat, the rogue captain who went too far. They would publicly condemn him while secretly studying the weapon he had proven. It was a familiar, cynical dance. He opened the file. It wasn't a summons. It wasn't a condemnation. It was a single data packet, a new set of coordinates. He stared at the numbers, his blood running cold. He cross-referenced them with the star charts in his mind, charts he knew better than the back of his own hand. The location was deep within Dravari territory, a place no human ship had ever ventured. It was a primary fleet anchorage, a shipyard, a nexus of their military power in the sector, a target so formidable that attacking it with a conventional fleet would be suicide. But the Indomitable was not a conventional ship anymore. Crowe understood instantly. The panic in high command had subsided, replaced by the cold, brutal calculus of opportunity. They couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. They couldn't unreveal their ace. So they were going to do the only other thing they could. They were going to double down. They were pointing him, their new, terrifying weapon, at the heart of their enemy. One battle, one horrifying victory wasn't enough. They wanted to make sure the message was received. They wanted to burn the lesson into the Dravari's collective memory. One battle was over, but Silas Crowe had just personally kicked open the door to a whole new kind of war. A war where the prize wasn't territory or resources, but the fundamental laws of existence. A war fought not with ships, but with heresies. He looked at Rostova, a silent, grim understanding passing between them. They were no longer just soldiers. They were a statement. He sighed, the sound lost in the lingering silence of the bridge. He picked up his mug of cold coffee and took a long, bitter swallow. The bill for this victory had just arrived, and he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones like a terminal disease, that he would be the one paying it, one star system at a time. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next adventure.